We are going to go ahead and transition into the next part of our agenda. For those of you just joining us, this is the second day of Together We Grow's annual meeting. And at this time, it is my honor to welcome the USDA Assistant Secretary for Administration, Oscar Gonzalez. Oscar, good morning, my time. Good afternoon, your time.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for inviting. I appreciate being here.
Thank you. For those of you who might not know Oscar, Oscar Gonzalez was recently appointed to serve as Principal Assistant Secretary for Administration at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Most recently, he worked in the financial sector, serving in executive positions at Goldman Sachs and Aura Financial. During the Obama administration, Gonzalez served in senior level positions with USDA, including as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Administration, as well as Deputy Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor on Immigration Reform to Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack. He also served as California State Executive Director for the USDA Farm Service Agency, where he oversaw farm loan programs across 58 counties in the nation's largest agriculture producing state. Prior to serving in government, Gonzalez worked with various nonprofit organizations, including the Constitutional Rights Foundation, Building Up Los Angeles, the Corporation for National Service, California Community College Foundation, the National Hispanic Environmental Council, East Los Angeles Residents Association, and the UFW Foundation. Gonzalez has a long track record of advocating for underserved and marginalized communities, with a focus on economic empowerment issues. His wife, Kristin Chavez, is the granddaughter of American labor and civil rights legend Cesar Chavez. He is a graduate of UC San Diego and East Los Angeles College. Oscar, we are delighted to have you, and I know that we are going to do a little bit of Q&A here towards the end of our session, but I was hoping you would open with some remarks about what you're doing at USDA. We are particularly excited as you and Tom have worked together in the past, and it's not your first rodeo,
Right.
and you've hit the ground running. So we're excited to hear what the administration's up to and your focus in the coming years.
Well, thank you so much, Kristin. Really appreciate you bringing us all together here. It's typically events like this where we recommit ourselves. We figure out the path forward. We know agriculture is at a transition point. And in my humble opinion, I believe where transition exists is where opportunities exist. Well, Secretary Vilsack sends his regards. He wished that he could be here when his office approached me about this, and I had a chance to speak with him last night. I let him know just how important this group is. So, Kristin, your leadership, paving the way, keeping the ladder of opportunities up is really, really important. I also want to just say a quick hello to Michael. I had a chance to meet Michael when the idea of bringing together the private sector, the public sector, universities, and nonprofit organizations, numerous meetings there in Washington, D.C. about this very idea. So, Michael, it's great to see you. I look forward to working with you. So USDA, for those who aren't familiar with our department, we are composed of 25 separate agencies that make up a total of 100,000 plus employees. Our annual operating budget is about $150 billion. We are driven by what Congress asks us to do via the Farm Bill. So 2003 will be the next Farm Bill, and that's going to really help us to shape our agenda for the next 5 years. But there's a lot going on the workforce end, and in my role as Assistant Secretary for Administration, I have a pretty sizable team that is helping to lead the way on return to work. The federal government, much in the way that we're used to today, your team are working remotely. So we are first doing whatever we can to help the administration to make sure that we get COVID under control. We made the necessary adjustments at USDA to make sure that programs and services are delivered. The American public just quite frankly relies on us tremendously. But we also want to place heavy importance on our employees and the needs of our employees. So in case you haven't heard, the federal government is undergoing some adjustments. You know, there's a vaccination mandate with a pretty hard deadline of the third week of November, when government employees will have a few options But what we're trying to do is to partner with the private sector to make sure that we bring COVID under control. At USDA, many of the federal departments have been given the latitude to determine when they're coming back. So executives like myself and others, we will start to make our way back in December. In rank and file employees in early January will start to make their way back. And then by March, we're hoping that we have the full team back in the building, or those who don't have the opportunity to work in an office setting, that they are there together with their colleagues. We are really relying on the White House and Congress to really help to understand the disparities that exist. There's a few issues and initiatives that I am working on that deal with making sure that we are leveling the playing field on the equity and fairness end. Over the years, USDA has disproportionately provided services for a variety of reasons, but we're wanting to make sure that any challenges that are within our systems, that we're strengthening them. We also are placing a heavy focus on what our workforce looks like in the future. Not only are we wanting to make sure that we are looking things through an equity lens, but we are also making sure that we look at this from a talent recruitment and retention end. What I'm hoping to have a conversation here about is some of the things that we're doing at USDA, some of the innovation that we're embracing, some of the data that we're incorporating, how we are looking at telework, how we're making sure that not only the millennials, but Generation Z, that they look at places like USDA and the rest of the federal government as an employer of choice. So hopefully that's okay for an opener here, Kristin.
That sounds wonderful. You know, I think that much of what you have been talking about, if we were just going to pick two places to dive in on the workforce side, are exactly what we've been talking about in this meeting. Earlier today, we had a closed door session with a lot of our chief human resources officers for our companies, talking about the most pressing issues that our industry faces. And it's similar to what you have articulated. I'm curious if we can dive in a little bit on that equity framework and how you guys are applying that to both the workforce issues that we all are facing, and also some of your strategies and programs that you're implementing across the country.
Sure thing. Well, first, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that for us, you know, equity starts with understanding the needs of the public. The $150 billion that I just shared really comes in way of much needed services. So we want to make sure that we clearly understand how our program services are distributed. We believe strongly that the traditional ways of communicating in the form of outreach needs to be strengthened and needs to be improved upon. But as it relates to equity in the workplace, it's probably about 40% of what I do on a daily basis. We want to make sure that USDA, first, that all of our employees have the training that they need, that they have the tools to work with. As we start to transition to what we believe is a more forward-looking workplace that will embrace telework. In fact, the telework policy under which we are currently in, that if an employee and their supervisor agree, a USDA employee, again, provided they can do so, has the ability to work up to as many days as 4 days per week. So that would be 8 days per pay period. Really is like ahead of many of the other federal departments. But we also believe that as we take a look at many of the vacancies, USDA is experiencing an attrition rate mainly due to retirement, unlike anything we've ever seen before. So we have a real opportunity to incorporate some strategies so that we are a modern looking department. We are made up of 350 senior executives outside of the political appointees. Those are the individuals that really run the department. So we have already embarked on doing some training, making sure that they understand that taking a look at balance and diversity is critical. Secretary Vilsack and Deputy Secretary Bernal have done numerous town halls, both department-wide and down to the agency level, getting ideas and suggestions. Back in the previous term for the secretary, he had a cultural transformation initiative. So we are also fully underway with that. again, really thinking about making sure that USDA is employer of choice, making sure that we have the tools to work with, making sure that we do reflect a modern workforce.
Could we dig in on the cultural transformation? Because I know that you and the Secretary have been engaged in this diversity, equity, and inclusion journey since your prior tenure. And I'm curious what lessons you have learned focusing in on your own workforce that you think is applicable to private sector and some of our other partner organizations.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kristin. Well, there was a gap of 4 years between VILSAC 1.0 and VILSAC 2.0, let's call it. A lot has changed tremendously. I mean, I'll give you just an example: data, analytics, predictive analytics, really being able to take a look at numbers, making sure that we understand where there may be some trends. Where we feel, one, it goes without saying that when we left in 2000, early 2017, USDA was ranked number 10 out of 17 federal departments in terms of best places to work. You know, I regret to share with this group that we are back down to 16 out of 17. So employee morale is at an all-time low, and then there's a combination of reasons for that. So part of what we believe is going to be making sure that employees know, one, that they understand the mission, that they understand that their supervisor is going to have all of the training to help lead the way. We also want to make sure that that employees understand the team that they're working within. We also believe that the voice, more often than not, for many of these employees are either internal associations or unions. So we really wanted to make sure that any ability to communicate with employees outside of just pressing the send button on an all-employee email message, we're wanting to make sure that we are getting the necessary feedback. So through all of these town halls, we have a long list of ideas and suggestions that we're going to be carrying out on. Some of the things that top the list are, I mentioned a bit ago, telework. People really have felt their level of productivity, their ability to balance out their life. And so that is something that we are currently working on, is how could we make this work? How can we make sure that employees don't have to spend 45 minutes in traffic going each way, that they have the ability to get off of work just enough time to be able to coach a Little League game or to go and volunteer at the local church. So really, we just believe that COVID has really brought about a whole other set of challenges to the workplace on top of those that already existed.
Absolutely. I'm curious, in the face of that, I know that you all are doing quite a bit of time really thinking about how you engage your employees and set up some of those structures to try to meet people with what they're hoping to get out of their work lives. I'm curious more broadly, I think one of the shared issues or challenges that we face across the industry is making our sector attractive to up and coming talent, to young talent, to people wanting to have more purposeful careers. And I'm curious, both for USDA and more broadly in the sector, how do you think we position ourselves, both in the short term and in the long term, to make sure that we're attracting the talent we need to drive the innovation we need to solve some of the big challenges that we face?
Absolutely. Well, I do know that is the common thread that brings all of us together. That really was the key challenge that we were trying to address when we met with Michael back in the day. Well, I could just draw my own personal experience. People probably know me as a guy who's worked in politics and government for many years, but from the time I was 14 up until the time I was 25 years old, I worked in the horse racing business. I did the work that my grandfather and my dad did, which was to take care of horses, everything from, mucking stalls to getting them prepared for the day, to working closely with veterinarians and horseshoers and on and on. Back then, I never knew that there was tremendous opportunities that existed in food and agriculture. Never even occurred. I always felt that the only ticket outside of working on farms and ranches was to be a veterinarian. So there was this time that's all I thought that existed. And it just so happened that I stumbled back into agriculture. But as I reflect on what I would have told a younger me back then, again, young guy cleaning stalls, growing up in East LA, I would have probably said is to take a look at the amazing opportunities that exists in food and agriculture. That there's an assortment of universities, there's an assortment of programs and advocacy groups and trade associations. And I just feel that if we're going to really be trying to address the question that you asked, we have to start off when people are young. And we know of the infrastructure that exists, from 4-H to land-grant colleges to minority-serving institutions of all shapes and sizes. I think that is an important approach, but I also believe, and I started off by saying transition, that where transition exists, opportunity exists. I believe food and ag, in order to us to try to achieve not only the talent challenge, but to making sure that it's got the right balance and diversity, we also have to start to do what other industries have been doing to us, which is to recruit some of our best and brightest to go outside. I would, in my bio, you mentioned the work that I was doing in the Silicon Valley. It really was an eye opener, because most young people coming out of college, or even mid-career professionals, are all thinking about, well, where's the next technology company? Where's the next AI? Where's that trend? I believe that we have all of that within. I recently met with a group of vertical farmers, and they were really looking for an audience from within USDA to talk about how they're using innovation, how they're using technology to help feed a hungry nation and a hungry world, for that matter. So I believe it has to be a multi-pronged approach. I believe, just drawing on when I was a young guy, what would appeal to me, but I also feel that we have to identify those, not just frontline food and ag workers, those that are farming and producing, but those, because I've concluded that about 25 to 30% of food and ag is comprised of HR people, IT people, budget finance people, accountants. So we have to do a really good job with also understanding that although we want the researchers and the scientists and the food inspectors and the firefighters and others, we have to also start to identify those that need to be convinced that in agriculture, there are those professions too. In fact, I have a feeling a good percentage of your membership, of our colleagues on this call today, are frontline professionals who are probably looking at how they're going to be sorting through a pile of resumes to find the exact person. One thing I will say is this: typically what outsiders think is that if you didn't have a horse racing background or a farming background, that food and ag isn't for you. What we want are those skills that are transferable. I have found some of the best recruits, some of the best colleagues that I have that came from outside of the food and ag space. They understood what the mission is, they adapted. I just think that can sometimes be like this invisible wall of like, well, because I didn't grow up on a farm, or because I didn't, grow up on a ranch, there's not a place for me. So I believe that there is somewhat of a branding kind of component that we have to take. And I go back to what I said about us being a modern industry, that within food and ag, guess what? You can telework. Guess what? You still have the ability for all of the moments when you need to take leave to take care of some family business. So I believe that we have an amazing opportunity right now. And with all of our vacancies, I have that challenge right before me, is how to fill many of these vacancies and prepare for a lot of the retirements. So I think we're all this together to some degree here.
I agree. I'm getting a little bit of feedback for some reason. But I think that there is about 5 different things I want to dig in on from what you just said. One is, can we talk a little bit higher level about the challenges that we face and how we address some of those things through workforce and technological innovation? So climate change, for instance, I know is one of the big focus areas for USDA. And, I think that much of what we are doing as a consortium is really trying to tap in to those allied fields and that STEM talent, and saying, not only is this a place where you can apply those skills and that knowledge, but we have that additional layer of having a career with purpose, that at the end of the day, you're solving challenges to be able to do something that's so foundational to the existence of humanity, right?
That's right.
And then
Yeah.
there's a social justice and sort of food equity lens to that work as well. But will you talk to us a little bit about the big challenges that USDA is tackling, and then how you're kind of weaving some of those components together?
Sure. Well, first, I really appreciate you framing things the way you just did, Kristin, about other ways to communicate what is happening in the food and ag sector. You're right. We do have a front row seat, and we are part of the solution when it comes to climate change. But when I think about climate change, I really think about two key agencies. For example, actually, you could probably put three. So I would say Forest Service, National Conservation and Research Service, that's NRCS, and then I would put let's just say NIFA, Agricultural Research Service. I would put our research arms. Before Secretary Vilsack left in the Obama administration, he had set up climate hubs. It was a very, I think, a sophisticated approach, because people will not typically look at USDA. I think they do now, but they never really looked at USDA as being as being a group where we could provide some of the solutions. So in these climate hubs, what he was really trying to do is identify all of the parts of USDA that impact climate. I mentioned the Farm Bill a little while ago, and if you take a look at how previous farm bills have funded any kind of attention to climate, it's always been driven one by CEQ, so EPA, Interior, Army Corps of Engineers, just about everybody except let's provide the funding and the tools necessary to set up, for example, a climate office. So we see even today, we really don't have, I would call that sanctioning in the eyes of Congress to really be front and center on climate. But guess what? If people still want to have that salad for lunch that is probably in the range of $4 or $5, or to be able to go out and have a fraction of your income that you make towards food and your nutrition, unlike other countries, we have to start to take a serious look at climate. So climate is now happening at the senior most levels across the department. We're being asked by the White House for a range of plans. What are ideas and suggestions that we have? One, to reduce our carbon footprint, from the vehicles that we use to offices that we occupy, to really what are some of the measures that we need to take. I also have another role with the secretary, and that is on the immigration front. No group is being impacted more than frontline farm workers. There was a recent announcement made on the administration's willingness to take a look at heat stress, but farm workers are really, really experiencing this. And also the drought that we're experiencing out here in California, the wildfires, not only is it consuming up a lot of our budget, that it really is starting to jeopardize our country's #1 standing in food and ag. So climate is critical. And as you referenced, Kristin, we have to be able to communicate that out, that food and ag is central to the climate discussion.
How do you have ideas about how you can really begin to do that? Particularly, I think we're looking at some of those early pipeline efforts, how we engage with young people in our higher education system and earlier in the pipeline. I know that a lot of our members are doing problem-based learning modules and really talking about some of those adaptive technologies, vertical growing, seed genomics, soil. Yeah. How is it that you think that as an industry, we can sort of present a united voice, recognizing this is a highly political space, but there are some places where we have broad agreement to be able to engage this next generation in feeling inspired to come work with us?
Absolutely. Well, one, we need ambassadors like you, Kristin. I think you and your peers of your generation, there's a lot riding on your ability to be able to help to crack the code, I believe. But in terms of how we have the conversation, I believe it's really, evident, in terms of how the climate is changing, what the impact is on the environment. And I just really believe that we have to make sure, particularly for companies in the private, just for companies, I believe that they have an amazing opportunity to go beyond just, the what they're known for. I believe that there are some companies that are well known to brand and rebrand themselves just to make sure that message points that are out there that people associate food and ag, whether it's in the private sector or with the government. But I don't think that we've quite figured that out yet, Kristin. I got to tell you. But I do know this, that NRCS and Forest Service have numerous job vacancies. And I believe that we have to remind the public about what agriculture can do, especially with these pillars within, I guess, the largest employer, one of the largest employers in agriculture, and that is USDA. So I'm going to continue to give that some more thought, but I just really feel that it's really going to be this group's ability to really, how do we get that message? Because I will say that outside of the Silicon Valley, the young people that I engage with and interact with, they want to be part of that conversation, and they're looking for opportunities. And I believe if they knew that there are opportunities within the organizations, universities, and entities on this call, I think that they would jump at in a minute. We just have to start to kind of reframe things and kind of repackage things in a sense.
Yeah, I agree. Could we shift gears a minute and talk about building back better? And I would love to hear more about USDA's work, making sure that we're providing some economic resiliency, and also really talking about the work in rural communities. I think that so much of the through line that we're all trying to tackle really is being intentional about some of our hardest hit communities and making sure that we, as employers, as universities, as NGOs, are doing our part to reach people who've been most impacted by the pandemic, by COVID. Could you talk to us more about what you're doing?
Yeah, sure thing. My staff did a really good job of preparing me with some top line key investments that are going to be made. But I rather than just going into that, I want to just share with you that in addition to the American Recovery Plan, we have two amazing opportunities if we could get Congress to agree on the infrastructure spending package, and also on reconciliation. These investments are long overdue. We believe that rural America in particular is suffering and struggling as a result of COVID, more so than other parts of the country. Well, we are trying to make sure that happens. In addition to getting as much of this money out the door, I mean, you can just imagine the work that is needed. We're just trying to make sure that we have the ability to be able to get the programs and services out the door in an equitable and in a fair manner. But the effort on the part of agencies, within USDA, it's among the reasons that we feel hiring and even using some of these top line message points about some of these key investments that are being made. But one area in particular comes to mind, and that is broadband, and it's the ability to really connect rural areas and urban areas. I firmly believe that of all of the investments that have been made, it is going to be in the area of broadband. We believe one of the things that as people started to leave urban areas, thinking about staying with a relative, hanging out with grandma a little bit, they suddenly fall in love with these areas that many of them were raised in. A lot of them are even starting to ask about starting up some companies in these areas. But among the first challenges is bandwidth when it comes to connectivity. So I really believe that, one, the federal government's not going to be able to do this alone. It's great to see that some state level investments that are being made, but we also believe that the telecom industry has to be at the table. In fact, I begin to think more and more that many of these companies don't think of themselves as kind of rural tech or ag tech, but they very much are. I firmly believe that housing also is another area where there continues to be major challenges, both in the form of affordable housing and accessible housing. There are many who are now starting to take a look at, why is it that workers have to if they're working at a meatpacking plant 40 miles outside of Des Moines, for example, why is it that they can't have an apartment or a home closer to their workplace rather than having to make that drive? And so I believe that the two areas that come to my mind is broadband and housing, on top of just the other, the other amazing areas that are experiencing some investments.
Yeah, and I wanted to note that one of our member companies, Land of Lakes, under Beth Ford's leadership, has really been rallying the industry to address those broadband issues.
Great.
As well, recognizing that most of our companies do employ people in rural communities and wanting to both, I think, offer the economic stimulus that you just talked about, being able to work remotely or start companies in rural locations, and also ensure that people's kids are able to have access to education and technology and all of those things.
That's right. Yeah. Telemedicine, another example.
Yeah, absolutely. In that realm, as you all are looking at your investments in rural communities, how do you think that private companies, higher education institutions, NGOs, how can we work together in partnership to really try to address those issues, which you just articulated are very complex, are multi-layered and big issues like housing, technology access, how, that's not something one agency can do on its own. How do we work together?
Well, there's been several attempts. One attempt led by Secretary Vilsack in the latter part of the Obama administration. It was a rural investment initiative. He brought in a former college mate of his, Matt McKenna, former executive at Pepsi, to come in to figure out how we can leverage capital, for example. So if I could just talk just for a second about the importance of capital. We saw some important legislation to come about in the form of like empowerment zones, like how can we provide tax incentives? Because the reality is companies, they have a bottom line. They have a responsibility to their board, to their shareholders, to try to make their company sustainable and viable. So I think first we have to understand when we engage with the private sector, really on what level to engage with them. And that's where Secretary Vilsack's vision came in, which was to introduce the private sector to investment opportunities in rural areas. When you invest in rural areas, you by and large are going to be investing and reinforcing the good things that are going on in the food and ag sector. I believe that there were some key investments that were made, but then I believe that there was somewhat of a drop off just because of perhaps the time that it took. There's just has to be this, understanding that there's going to be some investments that are not going to have a quick return, but there definitely are. We could get the broadband part of, and that kind of fits into what I referenced as far as workforce housing, because companies need people. They need people who are going to be happy, and then they also need the broadband. So without those two key elements in rural America, we're going to see fewer and fewer companies and foundations understand that there are some major investment opportunities. So I believe that has to continue. I believe that there has to be perhaps a targeted approach, perhaps identifying not just states, but counties that have the leadership, the willingness, whether it's providing tax incentives or some kind of offsets, or that have demonstrated that they do take healthcare, housing, and broadband seriously. I think what we sometimes have a challenge is that everything can kind of be macro. Everything will be launched in a national way. What I have found to be the most effective is you have to run some pilot programs. So I can't even think of ever hearing about, a rural investment strategy on a pilot program basis. Like, this is why we're going into this area of rural Idaho or Colorado or North Dakota. But there has to be that, even if it comes at the expense of making people wonder why not their state, why not their region. I also believe, and this is a huge initiative that I'm very proud to be part of here, and it is on the small business front. When we take a close look at the U.S. Department of Agriculture's purchasing power, it is massive. I mentioned the $150 billion budget. A good portion of that is spent buying goods, supplies, and services. We pulled a map together recently to say, where are all of our dollars going? Well, there's this tendency, if you look at Maryland, Virginia, and DC, there's like an oversaturation, I'll say, of procurement activity goes on there. But when you take a look at states like North Dakota, Vermont, Maine, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, you see very little procurement dollars going out. So we are currently in the process of doing meetings with small business owners who are already entrepreneurs, small business owners doing amazing work, but they have never thought about becoming SBA certified to be able to procure with a department like ours. So we're doing two things. We want to bring in entrepreneurs, small business owners into the procurement fold. There's nothing like having an institutional client. Any small business owner on this call, you know, if you've got a reliable institutional purchaser, somebody that's not going away, that is your anchor, that's your bread and butter. We believe USDA could do the same thing. The second thing we're doing are those small business owners that we are already engaging with. What can we do more? How much more lead time can we give them on an opportunity? How cumbersome or overly cumbersome is our process? So I believe, and again, I would kind of bring back what can USDA be doing? We have to start to kickstart things on the small business front in many of these areas. And some of the feedback that we've been receiving about what more USDA could be doing is tremendous. So I talked about access to capital, talked about small business, but the other part has to be educating the workforce of the future and understanding that the workforce of the future is changing. We sit here right at the beginning of Hispanic Heritage Month, a third generation Mexican American. I take a look at our population growth in so many areas, and I know that there's many young Hispanic Americans that would love nothing more than to be partners with each of you on this call, giving their heart and soul to making a difference for your company. I believe if you look at the trends in the farming and ranching community, if you just take a look at, but a lot of them are first generation college educated and they're experiencing tremendous hardships. I'm talking maybe firsthand experience as the first college student, not just college graduate, my entire family. So it can be difficult. So I think we just have to really take a look at where the numbers are at, take a look at where the best investments. So access to capital, small business, workforce, but as it relates to education are the three things that I would say, Kristin.
Which I think are critical. And are also we are having alignment across our industry. A lot of our private sector businesses and institutions have been looking at that supply chain diversity as well, and to really shore up opportunities for smaller firms who haven't traditionally been part of their network. Our collective buying power is tremendous, and I think that's a real area where we're shifting economic opportunity across the country.
Right.
I think that I would love to hear more about your thoughts on the education of young people. And I know that USDA has some really tremendous partnerships with minority serving institutions.
Right.
You invest a tremendous amount in internships, mentorship programs. Could you talk to us just a little bit more about what you see as the opportunity on that front?
Sure thing. Kristin, one of the best kept secrets at USDA that a lot of people don't, quite frankly, that we do have an education arm. Congress puts in a lot of dollars into USDA to make sure that we work closely with higher learning institutions. Hopefully, maybe a common thread throughout is about investing in people. When it comes to young people, I believe that organizations like 4-H, any of those that are going to get young people a little bit closer to food and ag, that is an important avenue. I believe that we have to maybe take one step further. I'll give you an example. One of the key offices, newer offices within USDA, is the Office of Urban Agriculture. Smaller office, Senator Stabenow is putting a huge premium of an important emphasis on the Office of Urban Agriculture. It's got a small grant program, maybe about $5 million. But I believe that there's a lot of opportunity and potential there to really take a look at getting things like vertical farms, aqua farming, community gardens, out into areas where we have concentrations of the population. Again, we are in a very competitive environment for talent. So your point about how we reach out to young people, how we educate them. One, I'm a big believer in our public education system. I'm a product of it. I believe that the curriculum, I believe that the opportunities that a young person has, I think are tremendous. I'm always a believer in more internship programs. And we also have a vibrant internship and fellowship program. I would put ours up against anybody else's in terms of how seriously we take it. Could it be more diverse? Absolutely. Just like other parts of food and ag, but we continue to work on that. I would just have to kind of go back to my younger self. You know, it's somebody really understanding that if somebody, you know, has a drive and a passion, you have to just put a lifeline out there. You know, you really just have to understand that when each of us are on our travels, when we have that ability to do it, you know, reach out to the local school, reach out to the local vocational center, even the continuation schools, because we all know that there's young people, especially that need a second chance. But I will tell you, food and ag, we sell ourselves. We just have to get in front of the audience, and there's no doubt that the biggest area of competition for us, it's for young people to draw them into our industry. So I really like that question, Kristin. Thank you for asking it.
Yeah. Well, in the last few minutes that we have together, Oscar, I'm curious if you can tell us what makes you hopeful. What do you think is our opportunity as an industry to be able to really make this moment in time count?
Yeah. You want to know what really gives me a lot of hope? It's leaders like Secretary Bill Sack and it's Michael. You know, I believe that their generation has really made it easy for following generations, including you and me. I believe that we now have to kind of pay it forward. I really believe that there is this serious investment that has been made in us to be able to carry the torch. That gives me hope. I really believe that there isn't so much of a generational gap within our industry. I also get hope knowing that consumers are more vigilant than ever. I believe consumers, also voters, understand that if we take our message to them, that they're going to make sure that policymakers give us the right tools to work with. You know, the other thing that comes to mind is just really kind of the belief in our system and our willingness to help others. You know, I spent a lot of time on immigration, you know, and it's been a real tough go round for the, you know, 1.7 million undocumented that work within our agriculture industry. But if you want to talk about an area where there's commonality, you know, you're right, there's some divisions and some politics and differences, but there's one area where I have seen major agricultural interests and unions that you cannot get to agree on anything, but what they do agree on is our workforce. And I believe that, yes, immigration is part of that in the form of the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, previously ag jobs. But I also believe that that is just one of many, many things that leaders within food and ag and those representatives who are being held accountable, that they understand. So I get hope off of that. So if it's from immigration to educating our young people to making sure that those in the twilight of their careers, that they are treated with dignity and respect, and that we give them an opportunity to showcase some of the virtues of food and agriculture. So from where I sit, a lot of hope and a lot of optimism, Kristin.
I love that. Well, Oscar, thank you for sharing your hope and optimism with us today.
My pleasure.
And we appreciate your time and good luck as you continue to hit the ground running.
Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
You as well.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us for our morning sessions. We have a 15-minute puppy cam break, and we'll be back in 15 minutes to start our session on getting social with us. As you've heard this morning, one of the most important things that any of us can be doing and doing collectively is ensuring that this upcoming generation knows what an amazing place we are to work. And so we will be tackling that in our next session. We'll see you then.